She had nothing left, no home, no money, no hope. Her cruel stepmother had thrown her out without a second thought, shouting the words that would haunt her for weeks. "You're fired." Clinging to her few belongings, she wandered the streets, unsure where to turn. Every door seemed closed, every stranger indifferent. The world had grown cold, and despair threatened to swallow her. But then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. A man she didn't know, but one whose presence radiated power, danger, and influence. He was calm, silent, and watching her with a measured gaze that sent a shiver down her spine. This was no ordinary stranger. This was the secret Mafia boss, a man whose name commanded fear across the city. And in a single, unexpected act, he would step into her life and save her in a way she never could have imagined. Her misfortune had led her to him, and the moment he intervened, everything changed. Clara Bennett had never felt more alone. The bitter words of her stepmother still echoed in her ears. "You're fired. Pack your things and get out." There had been no discussion, no warning, just a cold, sharp dismissal that sent her reeling. For a single mum struggling to survive, losing the small stability she had worked so hard to maintain felt like the end of the world. She gathered her few belongings, worn clothes, and the small bag of coins she had saved over the past few weeks. Her little son Marco clung to her hand, his wide eyes reflecting fear and uncertainty. Clara had promised herself she would never let him feel the full weight of their struggles, but even she could not hide the despair in her heart. They stepped onto the cold, cobblestone streets, carrying nothing but what they could manage. The city felt enormous and indifferent, a place where survival depended on luck, courage, and cunning. As they walked, Clara scanned the streets for opportunities. Perhaps there would be work, an honest job, a friendly shop, someone willing to give a woman down on her luck a chance. But each door she knocked on closed in her face, each shopkeeper refused, each corner seemed to mock her desperation. Marco's tiny hand gripped hers tightly, and she whispered, "We'll find something, baby. Don't worry." She had to keep up hope, even when the world seemed intent on crushing it. Hours passed. Clara carried Marco through the city, the sun dropping low, casting long shadows across narrow alleys. The city was alive with sounds, the clatter of carts, distant voices, the faint music of street performers. But for her, every sound was a reminder of how alone they truly were. She stopped at a small park, letting Marco sit on a bench while she rested for a moment. Her chest heaved, the exhaustion and worry threatened to overwhelm her. Then, from the corner of her eye, she noticed someone observing her. A man in a dark, perfectly tailored suit, standing several yards away. His posture was straight, his expression calm, and yet it carried a weight, a presence that seemed to fill the alley with authority. Clara froze, unsure if he had been following them or simply happened to be in the park. There was a quiet intensity in his gaze that made her stomach tighten. She quickly turned, hiding behind Marco, but the man made no move to approach. He simply watched, noting every detail, her worn clothes, the bag of coins, the tired slump in her shoulders, and the way she protected her child. She didn't recognize him, yet there was something familiar in the way he carried himself. He was not like the ordinary strangers who passed by indifferently. This was a man who commanded attention without speaking, a man whose very presence demanded obedience. Clara had no idea that she was being observed by someone whose name alone struck terror into the city. The secret Mafia boss, a man who controlled networks of power, influence, and fear, and whose gaze could decide the fate of anyone who crossed him. The man followed silently as she left the park, keeping a discreet distance. Clara, oblivious to his observation, found a small cafe and begged for work cleaning tables or washing dishes, anything to earn a coin. The owner shook his head. She could feel Marco shivering beside her, his small hand clutching hers tightly. "It's okay, Marco," she whispered, forcing a smile. "We'll be fine." But the truth was, she had no idea how. As evening descended, Clara and Marco made their way to a narrow alley to rest for a moment. She leaned against the wall, trying to gather strength. Suddenly, the man in the suit stepped closer, his presence unmistakable now. Clara's heart raced. He did not smile. He did not speak immediately. He merely studied her, and in his gaze she saw something she could not name, an assessment, a calculation, a silent acknowledgement of courage. "You've been struggling," he said finally, his voice calm and deep, carrying authority and weight. Clara blinked, startled that someone would notice, much less speak to her kindly after a day of rejection and hardship. Yes," she whispered. "I have to provide for my son. There's nothing else." The man took a step closer. "You've shown courage today, and it hasn't gone unnoticed." His eyes softened slightly as he looked at Marco, then back at Clara. "Most people in your position would have given up, not you. That is why I am here." Clara's pulse quickened. She had no idea who he was. She only knew the power emanating from him, the sense that one wrong move could have devastating consequences. Yet, instead of fear, a spark of hope flickered inside her. Could this stranger, so calm, so powerful, actually help them? He extended a hand, not in threat, but in offer. "Come with me," he said. "I can help you find a way." Clara hesitated, looking down at Marco. Her son's eyes were wide, trusting. She nodded slowly, taking the man's hand cautiously. This single act of bravery and trust would change everything. The man led them to a sleek black car waiting at the curb. The city's neon lights reflected off its polished surface. As they approached, Clara finally asked, Who are you?" He smiled faintly, enigmatic. "Someone who knows what it means to fight for your life, and someone who doesn't forget courage when he sees it." Clara didn't fully understand yet, but a sense of safety washed over her. For the first time that day, she believed that their lives could change, that the endless struggle might finally find a reprieve. And she had no idea that the man standing before her, the one observing, judging, and now extending help, was the city's secret Mafia boss, a figure whose name alone could alter destinies. As the car pulled away, Clara looked at Marco and whispered, "We're going to be okay." For the first time in weeks, she felt that perhaps it was true. Her courage, humility, and perseverance had not gone unnoticed. She had survived her cruel stepmother's wrath, and now, through the unlikeliest of allies, a new chapter of their lives had begun. The streets of the city blurred past them, but for Clara Bennett, single mum, this ride was more than transportation. It was a journey toward safety, recognition, and the unthinkable intervention of a man who ruled the shadows yet had seen the light of her courage. The following Sunday, Clara Bennett woke with a strange mix of anxiety and anticipation. She had continued her routines as usual, opening her small store, arranging fresh bread and vegetables, and preparing a modest lunch for her son Marco. But the events of the previous week lingered in her mind. She had no idea that someone powerful was observing her, carefully noting every action, every word, and every interaction. Outside, the black SUV waited silently. Antonio Rumano, the Mafia boss who had secretly followed her days earlier, stepped out of the car, his presence commanding yet subtle. He did not enter at once. Instead, he observed from a distance, assessing Clara's demeanor as she moved through the streets and into her store. His sharp eyes noted her patience with customers, the careful way she arranged the products, and the calm composure she maintained despite the pressure of her life as a single mother. As Clara worked, she assisted an elderly woman who had dropped her groceries. She bent down to pick up the items, smiling and reassuring the woman. Marco watched, clinging to her skirt. Antonio's gaze never wavered. Each small act, the way she carried herself, the integrity in her actions, the gentle care for her child, was being silently recorded in the mind of a man accustomed to fear, power, and obedience. He realized that her courage was not loud or dramatic, but quietly formidable. Later, Clara closed the store and led Marco toward the nearby park. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the streets, and the alleys seemed darker, more oppressive than usual. Antonio followed discreetly, careful to remain unseen. His presence, though hidden, was deliberate. He wanted to see more of her in her element, away from his immediate observation. In the park, Clara set Marco down on a swing and watched him play, her eyes scanning the surroundings. When a man attempted to cut through too close, she immediately intervened, shielding Marco with her body and guiding the stranger politely aside. Antonio observed from a hidden distance, impressed by her quick thinking, her courage, and her natural authority over her environment. Even in her modest role, she displayed a fearlessness that few in his world possessed. As evening fell, Clara carried Marco home, the city streets now filled with the muted sounds of traffic and distant sirens. She felt exhausted but proud. She had navigated another day with patience, courage, and integrity. Antonio, watching from the shadows, reflected on the unusual power of ordinary acts. A single mum, facing hardship and danger daily, had exhibited bravery, empathy, and composure, qualities that even he, a man who ruled through fear, found remarkable. That night, Clara prepared dinner while Marco worked on his homework. She tucked him into bed, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "We'll be safe, Marco. Everything will be fine." Unseen, Antonio watched from a distance, realizing that the unthinkable had already happened. A woman of ordinary means had captured his attention and earned his respect through the quiet, everyday acts of courage that defined her life. The next Sunday brought another encounter. Clara opened her store, arranging the products meticulously, her movements precise. Antonio emerged from the black SUV, entering the store silently. Today, he was closer, more direct, yet still observing. Patrons and staff instinctively froze, aware of the aura surrounding him, but Clara met his gaze steadily, showing composure, integrity, and courage. "Clara," Antonio said, his voice calm and deliberate, "I have been observing you for some time. Your courage, patience, and composure under pressure are extraordinary. Most people in your position would have faltered, yet you have persevered." Clara's eyes widened. She had not realized the extent of his observation, nor that her everyday acts had been so closely watched. He moved closer, sliding a small envelope across the counter. Clara picked it up with trembling hands. Inside, the note read, "Your actions demonstrate courage and integrity that cannot go unnoticed." She felt a wave of relief and awe. A single mum, fighting daily for her son and herself, had caught the attention of one of the most feared men in the city. Antonio's gaze softened slightly as he observed her tending to her store, interacting with her customers, and guiding Marco. He understood that her strength did not come from wealth, influence, or aggression. It came from her character, her courage, and her unwavering moral compass. The unthinkable, he realized, was not her modest life, but the extraordinary bravery she displayed in each ordinary act. As he left, Antonio nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement that resonated with Clara more than any words could. She watched him disappear into the city streets, the envelope still in her hand. The Sunday ritual had evolved into something far greater, a recognition of bravery, a bond of respect, and the beginning of an unspoken connection between two worlds that had collided in the most unexpected way. Clara returned to her work, feeling a mixture of relief and pride. She understood that courage, composure, and integrity could ripple far beyond ordinary life, even reaching the most powerful figures. The Mafia boss had witnessed it all, and her small acts of bravery had left an indelible mark on his perception. For Clara Bennett, single mum and quiet hero of her own life, the unthinkable had happened. Her bravery had been seen, her courage recognized, and her integrity respected. And the story of their intertwined lives, the ordinary woman and the ruthless Mafia boss, was only beginning to unfold. Sunday morning dawned with a quiet stillness in the streets. Clara Bennett opened her small store as usual, arranging groceries and preparing a modest breakfast for Marco. She moved with care and composure, unaware that today would bring the culmination of events that had been quietly unfolding for weeks. The black SUV rolled to the curb, and Antonio Romano, the secret Mafia boss, stepped out. Today, he would no longer remain hidden. His presence commanded the space instantly. The patrons froze, staff paused, and even the city's faint noises seemed to fade in the background. Clara met his gaze steadily, her posture calm but alert. She sensed the gravity of the moment, though she could not yet grasp its full scope. Antonio approached the counter. "Clara," he said, his voice low but resonant, "you have demonstrated courage, patience, and integrity beyond what I have seen in most of my life. Today, you will see why your actions have mattered." Clara felt a mixture of fear and awe. She had survived cruelty, hardship, and isolation, yet here was a man whose reputation commanded fear across the city, acknowledging her in a way that was both validating and intimidating. He extended a hand, inviting her forward. "Your bravery has earned my trust," he said. Clara hesitated briefly before taking it, feeling the weight of his presence. The simple gesture bridged two worlds, her humble, struggling life and the shadowed, dangerous empire of the Mafia. Antonio's assistants observed discreetly, giving them space. He continued, "Most would have faltered. Most would have given in to fear. But you stood tall, not because of strength or power, but because of integrity and courage. That is far rarer than anyone realizes." For a moment, the world seemed to shrink around them. Clara saw in his eyes a measure of respect she had never imagined receiving, a recognition that her ordinary life had extraordinary meaning. Marco clutched her hand, sensing the solemnity of the encounter but trusting his mother completely. Antonio paused, glancing toward the small envelope he had left on her counter weeks earlier. "This is for you," he said, "a reminder that bravery, compassion, and integrity can reach even the most unexpected corners." Clara took it, feeling a surge of relief and pride. The unthinkable had happened. Her actions had been seen, valued, and rewarded by the man she had unknowingly impressed. Finally, Antonio nodded, signaling that the encounter had ended. He wheeled toward the door, his presence fading into the streets as silently as it had arrived. Clara exhaled slowly, feeling a mix of exhaustion, relief, and exhilaration. The Mafia boss had witnessed her courage, and in doing so had altered her life forever. She turned to Marco, smiling softly. "We're safe, sweetie," she whispered. He nodded, unaware of the magnitude of what had just occurred. For Clara, the journey from a struggling single mum to someone recognized by one of the city's most feared men had reached a dramatic, satisfying conclusion. The streets outside were quiet, the small store filled with the smell of fresh bread and groceries, but Clara knew that her life had changed. Courage, integrity, and compassion had bridged worlds that seemed impossible to connect. The unthinkable had been witnessed, and in that act, both her life and the Mafia boss's understanding of humanity had been subtly but irreversibly transformed. For Clara Bennett, single mum, the story had reached its conclusion, but its impact would ripple far beyond that quiet Sunday morning. Days had passed since Antonio Romano had revealed himself and acknowledged Clara Bennett's courage, yet the tension of their intersecting worlds still lingered in the air. Clara had returned to her routines, running her small store, caring for Marco, and slowly rebuilding a sense of stability, but she knew that her life had changed forever. The shadow of the Mafia boss's observation lingered, not as a threat, but as a silent acknowledgement of her bravery. Sunday morning brought with it a strange mix of anticipation and calm. Clara had prepared the store meticulously, arranging fresh vegetables, bread, and pastries, and setting aside a small basket of goodies for her son. Marco was cheerful, unaware of the significance of the previous encounters. Yet Clara felt the weight of responsibility, not just for herself and her son, but for the subtle trust that had been established with a man who controlled an entire empire with fear and precision. The familiar black SUV appeared at the curb, its engine quiet, as if respecting the gravity of the moment. Antonio Romano stepped out, impeccably dressed, every movement deliberate. He entered the store, scanning the room with a piercing gaze, noting each detail: the way Clara arranged the bread, the careful placement of items on the shelves, the subtle warmth in her voice when greeting customers. His presence, though quiet, commanded absolute attention. "You've maintained your composure," he said at last, his voice calm but resonant. Clara met his gaze steadily. "Thank you, signore," she replied. Her tone was calm, her posture confident, yet her heart raced. She realized that this encounter would mark the true turning point in their story, the moment where her bravery and integrity fully intersected with his world. Antonio moved closer, noting Marco playing quietly in a corner. "You've shown courage and care, not just for yourself, but for your child. That is rare. Few would act with such thoughtfulness in the presence of danger." Clara felt a warmth in her chest. For the first time, she understood that her actions, simple, consistent, and genuine, had created ripples far beyond her understanding. He reached into his coat and placed a small envelope on the counter. Clara picked it up, hands trembling. Inside, a short note read, "You have proven that integrity and courage can command respect even in worlds ruled by fear. Continue with your bravery." The words, simple as they were, carried immense weight. Clara realized that her life, once ordinary and uncertain, had now been intertwined with a man whose reputation extended across the city. The Mafia boss gave a slight nod, a gesture of both respect and closure. "The world can be cruel, but you've reminded me that courage, integrity, and compassion are forces more powerful than fear or intimidation. I leave you with this knowledge." He wheeled toward the door, and with a final glance, disappeared into the city streets, leaving Clara and Marco in the quiet light of the store. Clara exhaled, relief washing over her. She turned to Marco and whispered, "We're safe now, baby. Always." He smiled, clutching her hand, unaware of the enormity of what had just occurred. That Sunday, the rituals, the courage, and the simple acts of integrity had reached their climax. Clara Bennett had faced fear, poverty, and uncertainty, and emerged recognized and respected by one of the city's most feared men. The intersection of her ordinary life and Antonio Romano's world had created a bridge of respect, trust, and acknowledgement that would ripple through both their lives. For Clara, single mum, this was more than survival. It was proof that bravery, compassion, and steadfast integrity could change even the unthinkable. And as she locked the door, holding Marco's hand, she knew that life had shifted forever. The unthinkable had been witnessed, and her story, now complete, would leave a mark far beyond her small store in the city. The shadow of the Mafia boss remained, but no longer as a threat. Instead, it was a silent testament to the courage of a single mother who dared to act with integrity when the world offered only fear.